Quote of the week. When you assume it's real, what would you do? Honestly, it's actually more of a question. And I was reminded how powerful that quote is last week when I was catching up with two very good friends from business school who are really excitingly starting something new. And as we were catching up and so sharing feedback around what they're creating and just sharing lessons that I've learned in my own founder's journey, having worked at a venture studio where our whole job is to create businesses. And the number one quote I'm reminded of that just came out of me when we're catching up. When you assume it's real, what would you do? And I learned that quote actually from one of our founders of a company that we had incubated and invested in called Zola, which is a wedding registry company. And I love the founder. In fact, I would not have had my career if not for the founder there, who, what I love about her is she's a female CEO, but she's also Asian like me. There aren't many of those out there. And I remember when I was asking for her advice, gosh, now over 8 years ago, on how she was building the business and how she ensured that, feedback was taken seriously, that people were giving her honest feedback. And I don't even know if she remembers this quote or not, but it was one that really stuck out to me, which was, Wendy, if you assumed this problem you're solving for, this company you're creating for was real, what would you do? Well, okay, me as Wendy, I would actually start probably creating, a website, a fake landing page, start talking to customers, potential customers, showing them this sort of, sales mock deck. I would assume the product already existed because I'm not a product manager. I'm not an engineer. But what I am decently good at, is partnerships. So I can lean on that strength for myself and start to see how people would respond to this said new co that I'm thinking about. And through that, I can start to assess if there are actually legs to this pain point or not. What I love about this quote that I learned from her and that I was reminded of in the past week and a half is that when we're going after anything ambitious in life, there's always going to be mental hurdles that stop us from going after it. And sometimes whether or not we're aware those mental hurdles exist, the best way to attack them is through assuming that we are already on the path for whatever we desire next, and then starting to act in that way, to act in that seriousness of the pursuit. When I reflect then on my own journey from then going from VC to then being a founder of a healthcare company, and I never desired being a CEO, by the way, but I served that role. And I remember that transition felt so natural in many ways because when I was still my VC fund and I was thinking about this concept, thinking about this pain point, I just started to pretend it was real. What would I do? Okay, Wendy, I would start putting together a concept deck, a pitch deck, a sales deck, which I did. I whipped together 4 to 5 slides about the pain point, about what I thought could be a potential solution, even though nothing had been coded out, nothing had been incorporated yet. And I just started cold emailing doctors in this space. It's a health tech concept. And I just started emailing these physicians and talking to them about, hey, we are creating this product. Would this help solve your needs? And in the beginning, I got a lot of no's. Well, it's like not relevant, too niche. But then you get feedback and then you start to adjust the deck. And then from there, you start to get even more honest clarity around what it is that you're trying to solve for versus the other narrative that could exist if I wasn't assuming this was real and I was stuck in this kind of interesting limbo land of, maybe there's an interesting pain point here, but I'm not yet fully all in. Then my conversation would look a little different. Then my conversation would look like, hey, doctor, we're thinking about this. We're not sure. Would love your inputs on this. And so all I'm ever going to get then are wishy-washy answers back. I'm never really going to get then a real honest assessment around what their pain points truly, truly are that I can solve. So I guess for me, when I think about this quote, what would you do if you assumed it was real? It's been a really interesting reflection question for me that I like to reflect on every week, actually, and ask myself, Wendy, if there was like this independent board member looking at what you're doing, looking at your goals, whether professional or personal, and it was assessing, are you really going after it? I think one way to think about that is If I assumed I was already evolved into the next layer of whatever I wanted to evolve into as my goal, how would I be attacking it? I think about this in, like in fitness. How many of us want to become and evolve into being an athlete again? And when we keep saying to ourselves, oh, I want to be athletic versus I am athletic, even though, yeah, I might be running a 12-minute mile, it just adapts a different psyche. I attack my runs with a bit more with a bit more intensity. I hold myself accountable more to my run schedule. And if that's how I'm feeling even in my personal life with just like fitness, imagine then the growth across all these other different layers of our life. So that was the quote that I was reminded of this week that really it helped me assess, where am I not being as aggressive and where can I be more aggressive? All related to this question of, if I assumed it was real and it was happening, what would I do next? And I think this question is really, really helpful for what I've observed in founders. I mean, frankly, as a VC, by the time the founders even reach me, they're already all in. Like they already are. I think some of the fun benefits of being a VC, especially if you're a super early stage investor and you're like the first check in, which is like the most fun, is you're actually like meeting that founder when they haven't yet fully chosen for themselves that they're about to do the next 10 years in the pursuit of this vision they have in mind. And that's really cool because you're, as an investor, meeting the founder as they are in their head wrestling with the shedding of their old identity into this new identity, solving this pain point that may or not be related to anything they've done in the past. And that's so cool because as an investor, you are really taking a bet on them. And you're taking a bet on that founder before, frankly, they might even have the confidence to fully bet on themselves yet. But then I think about all the people that you meet way, 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 way earlier before they even have full conviction. And what I think about then is this quote being most relevant to those people, right? It's to people who they have the littlest bit of an idea that maybe this like little tiny hobby of theirs that they love doing might actually become the real thing that they want to have be the main part of their professional identity. When I think about this journey, people are always like, you got to believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, how can others believe in you? See, the challenge with that though is like, I mean, I love that quote, don't get me wrong. You have to be your biggest cheerleader. I really appreciate it when people say you have to believe in yourself first. Otherwise, no one else will. But the challenge I always had with that quote though was, what's it mean to believe in yourself? Like, how do you start? Like, what's the action step there? What, like I wake up in the morning and just tell myself, I believe in you, Wendy. Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's never worked for me. But I do think the quote that has fundamentally helped me, that I believe is a byproduct of believing in yourself, is just assume the role, whatever you want next, assume the role that you want next already exists, that you have it, even though you don't yet. What would you do? For me, like I'll give you an example right now. I want to be an author. I am an author. Actually, I am. I've written over 80,000 pages of a young adult book that has been in my head. And good friends, very good friends, know what's up. They know that I've been writing this. And I have full intentions on releasing this. And I have much greater ambitions for what this could become, for me at least. But the biggest mindset I had to make when I was just first starting writing my Google Doc a few months ago versus literally being at 80,000 words right now, where I have committed an hour every morning to writing this book, the biggest shift that I had to make in my head was, Wendy, you are an author. I had this big block my whole life and that I wasn't a writer because, I kind of like run on sentences. Sometimes I don't always know fully when to use the comma versus the em dash versus like, a couple of these little punctuation marks. And because of that, I've never really thought that I could be a writer because my rules around punctuation, wasn't always fully tight. But when you look at the definition of an author, right? An author is someone who puts the ideas that they have in their head into writing and they commit to it to the completion of a full story. And then they commit to the sharing of that story with other people. Those are the step-by-step aspects of an author. It has nothing to do with how many copies you've sold, with whether or not this gets published or not. All of that is not tied to the definitional aspect of what is an author. And so the biggest mind shift I had to make from writing was just a couple pages to now, which is a body of work of, call it 300 something pages almost, which is a lot. That's the most I've ever written in my life. And I'm doing this, purely out of love and passion and compassion for these characters that have just of this fictional story that's been in my head now. I owe it to these characters to complete this story. And I'm 20,000 words probably away from the conclusion of this first book. The biggest shift I had to make for myself was, Wendy, you are an author. So if you are an author, you have to treat this body of work with the love and compassion and the intensity and the discipline that authors who do this full time do. Because if I don't believe in myself as an author, if I don't believe in my words and my stories that I'm writing, that I'm dedicating my time to, one, the writing itself will show for that. The writing will show that. But moreover, other people, like, why are they going to want to read this story? I love these characters. I love this vision that I have for this book. And I let myself just start writing. And then to say disciplined, I had to remind myself that you are the author. And it's the same level of thinking that I had to apply to myself when I was, moving from nonprofit to VC land, which, by the way, I've never worked in startups. So the fact that I even spent 7 years as a VC investing in founders who are way more technical than I am. I mean, talk about a fucking pivot. But that was only possible because when I went to business school, I told myself at Stanford, Wendy, you are about evangelizing the stories of founders who've taken the bet, the ultimate bet, which is the bet on themselves. I mean, I wrote my whole Stanford essay on that. What matters to you most and why? Building intrinsic confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from taking bets on yourself, not the kind of confidence that comes from, what school you went to, how much money you make, all the fancy, fucking things that one could accumulate. That stuff's nice, it's fun, but it's fleeting. But the bets that you take on yourself, I mean, that's the power of assuming it's real. What would you do? That is my Wendy musing of the week. For those who are out there and they're thinking about what would it mean for them to, just go after it, whatever that after it might be. Maybe it's a screenplay that you've been thinking about. Maybe it's actually building that startup idea that's been in your head that you have let sit for years now. Whether it is going after a fitness goal, whether it is raising a certain amount of funding, just assume it's real. What would you do? Maybe that's the way in which, maybe that is the action-oriented mindset for what it means to believe in yourself. Assume you are the next thing you want to evolve into. What would you do? How could you be more aggressive? How could you embody the character that it is that you are assuming? I mean, isn't life basically just this big act? The Harvey founder in podcast recently was like, my role is changing every 4 months. And he's never been a CEO before. He was a lawyer for a year and a half and then started this really amazing AI company focused on legal tech. That's, crushing it. If his role's evolving every 4 months and he's never done it before. Well, guys, my friend, he's an actor. He's acting, right? He has to develop to the next level. He's leveling up. It's like a video game. So that's all it is, right? If any of us is going after something new, we are basically leveling up every 4 to 6 months, which means that we're never really going to fully know the playbook. And that's okay. We just have to assume it's real. What would we do next? How do we attack the goal and the dream? That's what I'm telling myself every week. That's what I'm reflecting on. And hey, I say all this not to be preachy or not to be guru, other than it was just a very profound reflection that I had in this past week and a half or so, talking to some really incredible, amazing colleagues of mine who I deeply respect, who are in their entrepreneurial journey themselves. And I was reminded of that quote as much as I was telling them and sharing them a story that I think you know, will help them as they're stepping into the founder version of themselves. I had to remind myself of that quote too, for my own creative endeavors that I'm pursuing. If you like what you hear, follow along the journey. Every 2 weeks we'll release, a new episode. Sometimes with a guest that I really, really care about, who I think is an incredible work, and sometimes just me sharing my Wendy musings of the week.